Appreciate everybody joining us and taking the opportunity out of your schedule for what will be promises to be a great presentation. Before we get started with the presentation, a few housekeeping notes and reminders. First, all CLE sheets must be turned in no later than Monday, October 19th, if you're viewing the session live. Second, as you may recall, most of session 2, the market update, will be broadcast later this afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern. Please join in for that panel to the extent you can. Third, the Attendify app remains open and in use. Please make sure to post notes and pictures and utilize the application. As noted yesterday, prizes will be awarded based upon participation. The current leaders in the clubhouse are Renee Daly, Ann King, and Noelle Sproul. Finally, I'd like to indulge us with a few additional minutes of your time following the panel, as CJs will make a few announcements, including the prize winners. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel, which is entitled Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging: How Lawyers and the legal professional answer the call to action. As we all know, given the current events and increased focus on the disparate treatment of minority communities in areas such as civil rights, education, fair housing, and economic opportunity, the importance of maintaining and sustaining a diverse workforce has never been greater. This panel will discuss the impact of social and economic inequalities on today's work environment, and address how lawyers can assist in healing and making our communities and the legal profession better by focusing their legal work on supporting organizations that advance equal rights causes and pursue policies that promote equity, inclusion, and belonging. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for this panel. It will be Nikki Lewis-Simon. Nikki is a shareholder and commercial litigator at Greenberg Traurig and a colleague. She has more than 21 years of experience. Nikki also serves as Greenberg Traurig's Chief Diversity Officer. As part of this evolving role, Nikki is the firm's executive level diversity and inclusion strategist. She works to align the firm's diversity and inclusion initiatives and programming with client needs, as well as the needs of the firm and the communities it serves, among other work. I'm now going to turn this over to Nikki. Nikki.
Thank you so much, Michael, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on today's panel. So as Michael shared, I am Nikki Lewis-Simon, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to moderate this great panel. So Michael did great with the housekeeping. There's one other thing I think they asked me to share, which is we will take questions in the chat feature at hopefully the bottom of your screen. And so we will take your questions in real time if you have some feedback for our amazing panelists. And so now for our guest of honor, I'd like to introduce you to, in alphabetical order, Akinyemi Akiwowo, Executive Director at Morgan Stanley, Angela D. Harrell, Senior Vice President and Chief Diversity and Corporate Responsibility Officer at Voya Financial, and Sarah Walker-Pauls, Assistant General Counsel, JP Morgan Chase. So welcome to our panelists. So I want to give them each an opportunity to just say a few words and share a little bit about what their roles are. So Aki, we'll start with you.
Hi, thank you very much, Nikki, and I'm very happy to have been asked to speak on the panel and with my esteemed colleagues and panelists. And so by way of background, again, my name is Akinyemi Akiwowo. I am an executive director in Morgan Stanley's Legal and Compliance Division, focusing on litigation from an institutional perspective of the firm. And then that's my day job. I guess the other part of my day job is I am also the co-chair of the Morgan Stanley Legal and Compliance Division Diversity and Inclusion Network. So again, thank you, Nikki, and I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, thanks so much. Angela.
Hi there, it's a pleasure to be with you today. Angela Harrell, and I am Senior Vice President, Chief Diversity and Corporate Responsibility Officer, which I like to say that I have the absolute best job at our company. I always tell our CEO that his paycheck is better, my job is better. I'm where culture and everything really that we do to support our employees, our nonprofit partners come together, and where we minimize, our footprint, our environmental stewardship through my corporate responsibility hat. I, like Aki, have a couple of different jobs. So I also head up our Voya Foundation, where we focus on financial resilience and financial inclusion for those from underserved communities. So I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Angela. And Sarah.
Yes, hello everyone. I am Sarah Pauls. I am an attorney at JP Morgan. I started my practice in traditional middle market corporate finance and moved in-house about 5 years ago to focus at JP Morgan on the community development space. So still practicing core commercial finance, but supporting businesses that develop and provide investment equity into community development tax credit finance projects. But I do have some other hats that I wear as well, including a lot of focus internally in the legal department and the firm on issues around diversity and inclusion. So I'm very happy to be here and to speak with my esteemed panelists and moderator.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Next slide. So we certainly want to thank our respective organizations for supporting each of us and permitting us to share today. And where need be, we can certainly say, you know, this is the opinion of myself and not my company, but certainly we are excited that our companies are doing so much in this space. So next slide. And the next slide. So the impact, as noted by our title, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, how lawyers in the legal profession answer the call to action. We are absolutely in a different environment, impacted by pandemic, recent civil unrest, and the deaths of Americans and all that comes along with those things. And based on my personal encounters, I can tell you there's no one that I have spoken to that does not share the sentiment that 2020 has been an incredible, unparalleled year on many levels. So as a result, how we respond as a profession is particularly important as lawyers, more so than anything. Our unique skills can, and I submit to you, should be used to create change. Next slide. So let's talk about, from our panelists' point of view, acknowledging this moment. Can you talk a little bit, and we'll go in reverse order. Sarah, we'll start with you in terms of your personal experiences and acknowledging the moment and the impact.
Absolutely. So kind of going back to the spring of this year, moving into the summer, when the pandemic itself crested and started moving full throttle, JP Morgan Chase being a massive financial institution, a global institution, the legal department internally, 2,000 lawyers plus, was very much in crisis management mode, you know, as trusted partners with our business partners. And so layering that in with the evolving racial unrest, George Floyd, it really was amazing to see a department that was already under a lot of pressure and stress and people who were performing high functioning roles in that kind of an environment make the space all the way from leadership on down to, in parallel, while we're doing our jobs in the financial sector, making space to deal with issues of race. And it has rolled out in a variety of ways, organically, very structured, but also unstructured and organic. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later, which I'm excited about. But I think some themes include giving individuals power and empowerment in the legal department to influence others, make a difference, bring what we see in our personal lives to the table in a way that you don't always see in corporate America. There's a lot that we normatively don't talk about in terms of race politics, and I'm seeing a lot more of that happening in the workplace, which for me is pretty exciting because I think we have to acknowledge before we can make a lot of change.
Thank you so much for that. And Angela, from your perspective, certainly acknowledging the moment in that personal space, but also, you know, how in your role engaging with that global and national and local coverage of all of this. How did you handle that?
Well, I'll tell you, you know, from a personal perspective, the pandemic hit me personally hard as someone who actually has underlying lung issues. So I found myself at home already feeling quite vulnerable when all of these things began to unfold. And quite frankly, not being okay. And I remember the weekend after George Floyd's murder, my CEO called me and to check on me. And I told him I'm not okay. Right now, it's real hard. There's so many different things that are erupting in our streets and in our nation. And quite frankly, it's not always easy to put on your professional face when you're feeling personally very different. And I think being at home also brought all of these, you couldn't compartmentalize. Leave it at home, get in your car, and get to the job. And so I think the acknowledgement of the moment at Voya took on an extremely personal tenor, not only because I am the person who leads diversity, equity, and inclusion, but also because I have a CEO who is both science and humanity mixed together in a really powerful way. And so we had some very candid conversations as leaders with our entire company, open forum, and really reinforce the it's okay not to be okay. Let's figure out how we have constructive conversations with each other. But let's not just talk. Let's figure out what we do to act. And so this moment, seizing it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Sarah and Angela, you both talked about sort of that intersection of the personal, in the moment, how our organizations have responded. And you talked about, Sarah, how, the outside world sort of came into our institutions. And Aki, I'll turn to you then with this part of the impact, in terms of the blurred lines and how, race and certain issues kick the door down of our workplaces. Can you talk to that?
Sure. And so there was a word that has been, brought to mind, it's almost a daily occurrence, is the term intersectionality, right? And so I feel as if, March happened, COVID, and then June happened, right? And so we're talking about the intersectionality of the circumstances of we're all home, and now we are all faced with these issues that if we were together in person, we would be discussing face to face, right? And so there's a dissonance that was occurring that made these conversations even more difficult, but necessary and vital. And so I can speak, from experience, just in terms of, as for our diversity network, we sat down late last year, myself and my co-chair, and strategically planned out what our year would look like from a diversity perspective, right? Our programming and things, the initiatives that we would undertake. Obviously COVID happened and that threw all that by the wayside. And one of the key initiatives that we were focused on in December, which COVID required us to pivot from, was there is a study put out by the Center for Talent Innovation called Being Black in Corporate America. And it was actually a study that was co-sponsored by Morgan Stanley. And it focused on exactly what the title suggests, right? The experience that Black professionals have and continue to have being Black in corporate America. And we planned a whole series of talks and discussions in person regarding this comprehensive study. Obviously, COVID happened, we're not in the office. And so we had a strategic question to answer as to whether or not we move forward with these discussions. June happened and our hands were drawn. We had to have these discussions. They were critical, they were vital, they were of the moment. And so I say all that to say, what happened in June and what subsequently occurred forced us and forced the firm and the division to have these discussions and have them in a deep and meaningful way. And we were able to use that study, frankly, as a starting off point for the discussions. And it was really remarkable to see the level of engagement. And this was not a circumstance where you had a bunch of Black people getting together and commiserating, right? This was an educational and, frankly, in some respects, a healing experience for many people in the division, right? You had Black people that were talking about their experiences. Angela, you brought up the point about just not being okay, right? And creating a safe space for Black folks to have that discussion and express that sentiment. And then an opportunity for others to hear that, right? And to empathize and understand and begin the process of taking affirmative steps to make sure that their Black colleagues, and frankly, all their colleagues, were and continue to be doing better under the circumstances.
Absolutely. And all of what you shared resonates and actually feeds very well into our next slide. So next slide, please. So we talk about the impact of lawyers as leaders, and, Aki, will kind of start with you here in terms of, lawyers, the trauma, mental health and wellness, which has always been an issue within our profession in terms of the high rates of suicide and alcoholism in the legal profession. So you talked about that moment, where, again, you have to come in and have these conversations. Can you talk a little bit more about what resulted from those experiences in terms of the wellness and creating safe spaces, excuse me?
Sure. I think that, in short, it was an increased understanding of the experiences that, again, specifically African-American lawyers and compliance professionals within the division dealt with on a daily basis, right? The CTI study, I hate to keep going back to that, but this is a shameless plug for it, I guess, because it's really a phenomenal study. It talks about the burden that African-Americans specifically deal with in the workplace on a regular basis in terms of things like microaggressions, right? Starting with microaggressions, we spent a fair amount of time just educating people, right? You'll be surprised about how many people don't even know what a microaggression is, let alone whether or not they've actually been the perpetrator of one. And one of the takeaways from these discussions, right, was people an increased understanding and appreciation for the concept that, yes, microaggressions in the workplace are a real thing, and that your typical person that doesn't know what a microaggression is more likely than not to have engaged in one, right? And so there was, I think it was cathartic, frankly, for a lot of people to be able to, again, have those safe spaces to discuss that with people who, given what was going on in the world, were particularly attuned to listening and hearing and changing behaviors as a result. Excellent.
And I mean, I really do see that the pandemic and the slowing of the globe down, and the unfortunate death of Mr. Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, almost like a perfect storm, right? Yep. It's just when everyone is sort of sitting still in their homes, hopefully safe and healthy, it really did hit us in a different way. And Sarah, you talked a little bit about this in some of your opening remarks in terms of, you have this massive legal department responsible for incredible deliverables in the midst of a global pandemic, and then these things happen. Can you talk about some of the ways those impactful conversations happened in safe spaces within JP Morgan?
That's right. I mean, we were seeing in the legal department, we were seeing a lot of increased activity. JP Morgan is already in communities. We're everywhere, right? So we already have very robust initiatives at the company around community development, not just philanthropy, but what the businesses can already do within their sphere of influence around issues of diversity, inclusion, revitalization of neighborhoods, financial health, all over the place, right? So in the moment of George Floyd and the racial unrest, we were already hearing a lot from leadership around these issues, what the company, what JP Morgan is doing. We were having these large town halls where everyone was getting together, but in a massive Zoom with hundreds of people, it's very difficult to have smaller individual voices be heard. So there were just a few of us in my silo in commercial banking who said, well, we should be having more intimate conversations with one another, and raised our hands, got together, got the support of, you know, our senior leaders, and within our own commercial group, have put together a series of conversations where we get to curate the material with some support from other resources at the firm and outside of the firm, and then just make a space for people to get together. They have a whole month to kind of read or listen to podcasts at their pleasure, and then we get together and we just talk. And so that was just one way where there was sort of a need to express, you know, even within a work setting. We were already seeing some of that happen on a larger level, but we found a way to bring that in within our own teams, within our own groups. We've done several of them, and so far they've been really successful. And then you start doing that, and you hear about more that's happening elsewhere. You start to be able to cross-pollinate and support what's going on in other parts of the legal department and what's going on in other parts of the firm. To not duplicate efforts, but just to be another resource to one another.
Excellent, absolutely. And then Angela, let's talk a little bit from town halls to action in terms of, you know, what is going on at Voya, lawyers as leaders, and getting into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, one of the things that has characterized our company and our leaders is this sense of empathy is where we begin, and that cannot be where we end. And so there has really been a focus on, and now how do we act? All of our leaders have, since the spring, had their own diversity action plans, and that includes our chief legal officer. And those action plans surround, you know, focus on not only attracting and developing and retention of talent, but also really engaging and getting to know the diverse talent within the organization, focusing on being involved with employee resource groups, leading in that regard. And so there is, across all of our leaders, a leaning into those plans that were already in the works, and not only with our very top leaders, those 8, but all of their direct reports. So even within our legal function, our chief legal officer and his direct reports have very specific diversity and inclusion plans that focus on underserved groups. And so that has also meant, yes, the town halls, the conversations, but also what do we do in terms of advocacy? How do we get engaged in initiatives that perhaps are not just within Voya Financial, but also outside? We actually sponsored, or we were one of the company signatories to the Georgia Hate Crime Bill, which passed just in August. If you can imagine, there was not a hate crime bill passed until that time. And so that is one of the ways that our legal colleagues have partnered together with us to act, to do things. And we've also encouraged our employees, our legal employees and beyond, to use the volunteer time that they are paid each year, which is 40 hours for all of our employees who can volunteer on company time, to advocate, to protest, to do the things that they do to reinforce their commitment to the community, and use that volunteer time to support those nonprofits and those organizations who are working to make a change.
Excellent. And what I'll add, as someone who I didn't share when I initially introduced myself, I think Michael may have done so, but I am at Greenberg Traurig. So as the sole sort of outside counsel on the panel, I will share that even from a law firm perspective, many of the things that Sarah and Angela and Aki have shared have similarly been happening in our law firm in terms of creating social justice webinar where we shared our path forward and creating the space to have conversations within our affinity groups. Some offices have undertaken book clubs and things of that nature. So there are things that we're doing as lawyers, and certainly to, I think, what Angela, Sarah, and Aki are sharing as well, bringing in our business leaders as well. It's not just the lawyers, but it's certainly lawyers as leaders. So we have 2 points in the Q&A. I'll start with the first one, which is, can we provide some examples? And Aki, I'll throw this one out first to you, and then Angela and Sarah, if you want to join. Can we provide some examples of microaggressions?
Where do we begin, right? So I guess maybe start with what a microaggression is, right? Typically, a microaggression is defined as a subtle, often unintentional act of, frankly, racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, right? You name it, right? And we spent a fair amount of time internally at Morgan Stanley just discussing and educating, like I had mentioned earlier, about what exactly this is and how they manifest. And time in and time out, the number one articulated microaggression is actually a tie, right? But I would say the first one was specifically with African American women talking about the circumstance where a non-African American colleague touches their hair. And it is an experience that I have learned and seen that, I'd be surprised at this point if there is an African American professional woman who has not experienced that circumstance, right? And so I think that's one example. Another one is the use of the term articulate to describe people of color, and this comes up frequently in the context of, we're at year end at Morgan Stanley, as much as I'm sure as many of the other organizations are as well, and that means we're in the middle of performance evaluation season, and the notion and the concept that oftentimes African Americans are overwhelmingly, disproportionately described as articulate, which again can be viewed as a microaggression, because when someone is describing you as articulate, 9 times out of 10, it is with well intention, right? It's with good intentions. But embedded in that term articulate is the soft bigotry of low expectations, right? I didn't expect you to be able to string a sentence together, and therefore I am surprised that you are able to do so. And therefore, the first thing that comes to mind when I am speaking about you is how articulate you are, right? And so, Angela, I see you're shaking your head. It sounds like you relate.
I can't tell you. Sometimes I've been like, you can't pet me.
No.
That's not okay. To put your hands in my hair. I am shaking my head. Aki, it goes everything from telling someone who was foreign born or who has a foreign sounding name, oh, you speak English really well. Or saying to a man who says, I need to leave early to go pick up my kids. Oh, you don't wear the pants in your family? As if fathers don't care for children.
No.
Or making these assumptions about women and what they're able to do. Oh, well, that role actually it has a lot of travel to it. She's got really young kids. Making decisions, making assumptions, taking these things, and again, not always intentional. My number one microaggression is not even something that most people think about. When I hear the word flesh color Band-Aid, or when I see nude pantyhose, those are microaggressions instantly, because those are never made for me, right? So there are even things that companies do, and the way that we communicate about what is the norm.
Yes. And
when something deviates from the standard, sometimes the microaggression is embedded in just the way that we talk and think.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good theme, that it almost always is unintentional, and it's chronic, right? It's like these chronic little interactions, very often reflexes, and anyone can do them. I mean, these are just sort of part and parcel. So I think it's a matter of awareness, and I think it's great that we talk about this more now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
One point
thank you.
I just want to add that
Yes.
that one byproduct, right, of microaggressions, Sarah, to your point, is that they amplify the only experience, right? When I say the only experience, oftentimes, as a person of color in corporate America, you are oftentimes the only person of color in a meeting, on a call, and it's compounded, particularly, for Black women, right? If you are a Black woman, you are oftentimes the only woman and the only Black woman in a meeting. And these microaggressions have the unintended consequence of demonstrating to you how other people feel about your, frankly, existence.
Yeah. And hopefully you all will invite us back for the next meeting and we can delve more into this, because it certainly is, in all seriousness, it is a level unto itself. It couples well with the discussion about unconscious bias. And it's something that, having these conversations are really important, again, to the point of all the panelists, to develop empathy, understanding, mutual respect. So next slide.
Nikki, real quick, if I can just interject, I was going to respond to one of the other comments, and I know that not each of you are familiar with the overall curriculum with respect to the ACIC and this conference, but there was a question in terms of a lack of representation of Black people on other panels, and I just wanted to interject quickly and respond. Obviously, the ACIC is committed to diversity. I would note that I think that question is incorrect. There have been Black people on at least two other panels, including the market update and the working from home. And there have been people of color on other panels. Obviously, we're always trying to do our best to get as much diverse representation on the panels, but I did want to respond to that.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much. And so so we've heard about some of the experiences, some of the things our organizations are doing in this space to advance the ball, both as legal professionals within the profession more broadly. But really now I want to turn to using the rule of law and CSR, or corporate social responsibility, to help drive the change, which is part of what this dialogue is all about. Next slide. So this is why we are uniquely positioned, right? And sort of the phrase goes, to whom much is given, much is required. And that certainly is applicable to each and every one of us attending this webinar today. So Aki, I want to turn to you in terms of some of the things that your organization is doing in terms of the strategic focus on the law.
Sure. So look, what we are, in a unique position, our legal department is, a fairly large consumer of legal services, right? We have wonderful firms like Greenberg Traurig that, we rely on when we have some of our most complex and challenging issues that arise, right? I think one part of that is, and one thing that makes me proud to work with a lot of the firms that we do, is that they share our commitment, to our core values in terms of giving back, promoting diversity, and doing the right thing. I say all that to say that, we have been able to partner with a number of firms on pro bono efforts, right? And what comes to mind immediately is, in March and April, we worked with Volunteers of Legal Services to help with COVID relief, right? And as you all are certainly aware, COVID happened and had a devastating impact on and it continues to have a devastating impact on small businesses, obviously in the New York metropolitan area, but across the world, frankly, right? And so many of our lawyers, worked, with some of our law firm partners to provide pro bono services and consultations to small business owners who are having issues navigating, all of the opportunities that were available at the time for COVID-related assistance, navigating concepts of, potential bankruptcy, breaking leases, right? Renegotiating leases. And so, I'm proud to say that, that commitment that we have, extended to and through many of the law firm partners that we work with.
Excellent. And you also had mentioned in terms of in our preparation, some of the laws in terms of focusing on laws across the different, across the country that impact or disproportionately impact Black and brown people. Do you want to touch upon that a little bit in terms of that strategic focus?
Sure. Yeah, we've also focused with the law firm Anti-Racism Alliance, right? Which, again, to that point, focuses on laws that disproportionately impact, communities of color, right? And that is a more longstanding sort of programmatic partnership that is ongoing. And I think what has happened during COVID is, as we all know, COVID has impacted frankly, peoples of color disproportionately. So there's a connectivity between the COVID-related work that we have done and also sort of the law firm anti-racism work. I feel like they've all sort of came to head when COVID happened. And again, that work continues.
Thank you. And before I have a housekeeping matter, the first code is 27980. The first code is 27980. Thank you, and sorry for that interruption. I have one more code to give a little bit later, but those are some of my marching orders. So to get back into the CSR piece, Sarah, can you talk a little bit about some refined tactical focus for JP Morgan Chase in this space in terms of its core efforts and transactional causes?
Sure, and I'll try to be mindful of time, but I've been with the company for about 5 years, and across that, even just that small amount of time, I've seen a real evolution of how our large legal department has become more tactical and more strategic around pro bono. It sort of relates to more broadly how the company looks at its core competencies, what we do best in the financial sector, and how that relates to community development, how that relates to workplace skills and jobs, financial community health, financial health of our customers, and other community development support that we can provide given our expertise in the financial sector. So for pro bono, even in those 5 years, I've seen, we always had a day of service, but now it's really become more robust, and the legal department, sort of everybody puts their pencils down on that day globally. But those initiatives, those events, that representation that's going on that one day has branched out throughout the year. So it's a one-time opportunity that in many cases attorneys can, and other paraprofessionals and other folks in the legal department can move forward with those organizations that we partner with and make those more mid to long-term opportunities. So I'm doing an asylum case that is very long and ongoing. But in terms of transactional, again, we're looking at our areas of expertise. We're looking at PPP coming off of the crisis, and providing small businesses with transactional support around navigating the PPP process and the other ancillary programs that were rolled out over the summer. Even prior to COVID, though, a lot of what we're doing in the transactional space revolves around that support for small businesses that we already are connected with through our day-to-day activity at the firm. And attorneys can also, that doesn't preclude anyone from doing their own ad hoc representation on a pro bono basis, sort of outside of what the firm is doing. But it's nice to see that there is really this whole network that has been continued to be refined and built out around pro bono, sort of across the board.
Excellent. And as we move to the next slide, I'll say that, one of the biggest challenges, of course, or certainly we hear it even in our firm, is I'm a transactional lawyer. How do I get involved? How do I do pro bono, since it tends to be areas that lean towards litigation? But what Sarah is sharing, and Aki, and certainly Angela will get into this in just a moment, there is a lot that transactional lawyers can do in terms of finding opportunities to lead in the way of change after these devastating events. So we'll go now to the CSR aspect. And again, these are inextricably intertwined, but can you talk a little bit about, Angela, the day of service and some of the things that you all are working on?
Yeah, so community is a really big deal at Voya, as evidenced by the fact that I said we've got 40 hours per employee to actually volunteer. And we're tiny. We're 6,000 people. I call that tiny when I'm thinking about Sarah's big company. But the amazing thing is, those 6,000 people on an annual basis, we usually volunteer around 35,000 hours. And so 70% of our folks are actually out volunteering. And it provides ample opportunity, not only on just that day, which is typically in May, but throughout the year. And I will say that our legal department is always up at the very top in terms of their level of engagement. I think that, one of the things that we encourage individuals to do across the company is, yes, think about the skills that you have that are specifically well suited to help our nonprofit partners. And so one of the things that we do is we also put our executives on nonprofit boards. We have a board program that focuses specifically on that. But we also bring them opportunities to apply their skills, legal and otherwise, with some of our nonprofit partners as a way to really have meaningful relationships and not just be an organization that writes a check and says goodbye and good luck. And so we really try to focus on that strategic support of our nonprofit partners. I think that when you think about the need that exists, and in all of our communities across this country, so many people think, and we're domestic, so I'm saying this country in particular, leaders have so much to give that they don't even realize it just from being professionals in their environment. So we do things like helping our nonprofits with their strategic plans, helping them think through changes in their organization structurally, right? So there's so much that can be done for a lawyer, even because of your management experience, because of the experience that you have in your professional environment. That may not just be litigation. It's just what you have to share that's even more, I think, profoundly valuable for these nonprofits who can't afford to hire the services or expertise.
And that's actually really, I just wanted to say too, that for larger organizations, I mean, like exactly what you just said, Chase puts together teams of its employees through a service corps. They partner with global philanthropy that sits outside of the businesses. They find those not-for-profits who need that exact kind of help. They bring lawyers, business folks from the business, finance teams together to do a drop-in secondment for 3 weeks, for a month, to provide that strategic kind of support for not-for-profits. So it's really exciting to hear about that, across our organizations.
Excellent. And as we move to the next slide, I want to take a question here in the chat. And it says, or the question is, how can organizations continue the momentum directed towards supporting D&I efforts that has been created by recent events? In your opinion, how do we create sustainable change? So momentum, and sustainable change. Go ahead, Aki.
I think that's a phenomenal question, because it's something, frankly, that I have thought about myself, right? June, we're now in October, and, emotionally, while June feels like it was yesterday, right? I think practically and in the business cycle, June was quite a while ago, right? And so, I can speak to, at Morgan Stanley, I feel fortunate that our leadership in the wake of June took a number of very direct and ultimately long-lasting and reverberating steps in direct response to what was happening in June. And the one that comes to mind, or two that come to mind immediately, were number one, so Morgan Stanley, prior to June, had 4 core values, right? Doing the right thing, giving back, leading with exceptional ideas, and the fourth one actually escapes me. But immediately after this, and these core values had been in place for quite some time. And when you walk into Morgan Stanley's headquarters at 1585 Broadway, they are etched into the ceiling, right? And so it's a constant reminder of these are the things that we focus on day in and day out as we do our jobs. Well, they added number 5, promoting diversity and inclusion, right, to that, right? So it is, at a minimum, it is a physical reminder that this is something that the firm is committed to. I think the next step that, again, this is just 2 of several, but that, are again, long lasting and have reverberations just beyond June, was for the first time in the firm's history, an African-American woman was appointed to the firm's operating committee, right? And so the expectation and the hope, is that those very overt and direct steps that were taken will be a constant reminder and a constant call to action of what has happened and what our commitment is going forward to remedy, at least as it relates to us, right? What contributed to those issues.
Excellent. Angela, you want to speak to that, and then Sarah, and then we'll go back to our CSR.
Oh, I think you're muted, Angela.
There you go. Part of how we're going to make sure that we continue to drive positive change is to make sure that there's greater connectivity across our entire enterprise, all of our businesses and functions really working together. So we've established a diversity, equity, and inclusion task force that is robust, that has a focus on not just colleagues, but clients and community, and programs and initiatives that include business leaders from across the organization, but specifically business leaders who are kind of top talent, emerging talent, and people of color, and women and underserved groups leading the charge. And I think that one thing we're going to get is just some really wonderful perspective and insights about the experiences, but also there are going to be these collaborative ways that we're going to not only put together innovative business solutions, but also enhance the strong culture that we've already fostered. We have just announced what is a really unique program called the Just Right Advantage program, which focuses on providing retirement planning kind of support and services to smaller businesses that are, again, owned by those in underrepresented and undersaved demographic groups. And so this was a partnership between our retirement business with also some support from my team from a CSR and diversity perspective, to really think about how we start to invest in communities to make sure that this whole notion of economic empowerment comes together so closely with all of these kind of the differences, the disparities across demographics. That economic empowerment and education piece obviously are so key. And so that's one of the areas where we can focus and delve deeply. And so it's about how do you use what you do and how you do it to empower those communities who've been marginalized. And so that's what we're focused on, making that a business for us, a focus for us, as opposed to a nice, it can never be a nice to do, but really being very intentional about it.
Excellent, Angela. And Sarah, I want you to speak to that point too, in terms of sustainability, and then I'll add something when you finish. Thank you.
Sure. So I guess I'll steal a little bit of my own thunder, but it's like looking for opportunity. Where are you not in the space? I mean, JP Morgan is already doing a lot, but it's using this moment to see where are the gaps. So for example, we have internal resource groups for for different affiliations, including, Black employees, BOLD. We have a legal diversity council for the law department that has lots of different pillars and focuses, but we found that we didn't really have a space for Black lawyers. We have a legal diversity council, and there are Black lawyers addressing certain issues within that council. So folks got together and decided to put together a forum for Black lawyers specifically to escalate issues, to present ideas in partnership with these resource groups that already exist. That's internal, right? External. I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that Chase is doing, including a huge initiative which just rolled out, but it's looking at where are we in our community? Where are we culturally in the community and internally, and just doing more so that it is a part of the fabric of who we are as a company. And being a part of that fabric creates that sustainability. And I think we said it, naming it, even just the small acts of talking, of acknowledging, of naming things that we professionally haven't really named in a lot of ways, is also a way of creating accountability and sustainability across individuals and then the broader organizations.
Excellent points. All what you have shared is really excellent points in terms of adding to the core values, the DEI task force and connectivity across the enterprise. And as Sarah just added, where are we not in this space and how do we fill in the gaps? Very important pieces. And I can share, within our firm, we created the GT Social Justice Action Academy. It's an internal effort. We created an equality toolkit, which we feature on our intranet, books, podcasts, articles, and other things that colleagues can go out and, pick something and listen to it. They can make recommendations to the Equality Toolkit. And so, that makes it part of who we are. And we are also having some courageous conversations around topics like criminal justice reform and other issues. So to the attendees' question, in terms of sustainability, everything that my co-panelists have shared is really critical. Where are you not? How do you create connectivity across enterprise? How do you embed it in the core values? That's the way you create sustainable change. So thank you so much for that question. And I see, so we're at 2:07. So we're gonna speed up just a little bit so that we can get to everything. Sarah, I do want you to just very quickly touch upon these 4 pillars and then we'll move on.
Yeah, and I think I've mentioned them. So these 4 pillars that you see on your screen have been with JP Morgan as an institution. It's a way that we can kind of focus in on what we do and where we can be most effective in the spaces where we work and where we influence. And so, but a good example is this massive $30 billion 5-year commitment that was just announced. Where if you've read anything about it in the press, and my space in the community development teams means that I had a lot of upfront understanding of how all these different pieces kind of have come together, specifically within this 5-year commitment. But you're looking at strategic ways of supporting small businesses, Latinx, Black businesses in particular. You're looking at what are we doing for affordable housing? What are we doing around home ownership? What are we doing in the consumer bank and in the community bank that we can come together and really enhance what we're already doing to make more of focusing on outcomes, to make more of a difference and to hold ourselves accountable in those spaces. But then also, there's a lot internally that we have to do. We know and we have goals around a diverse workplace, but we can see where we're coming up short, right? So you have to really, a good example of that is we're putting specific folks in the community as financial support and providing specific in-branch support for folks that want to use Chase to enter into home ownership, right? Like looking at who are the people in the building, in the branch that understand their communities. So some of this we were already doing, but I think bringing it all together and putting very specific targets on it is really exciting to see.
Excellent. Next slide. And as we go to the next slide, I will announce the second code, which is 81585. Again, the second code is 81585. And so what you've heard from all of our panelists, and I think, the point should not be lost in terms of lawyers and driving important change as leaders in our legal departments, in our law firms, in other organizations, even if we're embedded on the business side of our organizations, but we still, have that lawyer hat, is that charity starts at home. The sustainability is about what do you do internally to drive positive change, and then what do you do externally? And I think each of our panelists have certainly hit upon that. And so we'll delve into that in our last segment. Next slide. And Aki, we'll start with you in terms of Morgan Stanley's 3 pillars.
Sure. So in our legal and compliance division, diversity and inclusion network, all of the initiatives and the work we do, we're deliberate about making sure that they fit into one of the 3 pillars. And those pillars being inclusion, education, and pipeline. And, I'd like to focus, very briefly on pipeline, because frankly, I think it's the most impactful one, at least from my perspective, right? Our goal is really to develop a pipeline of aspiring and senior diverse attorneys and compliance professionals within our division, right? And there's 2 components of that. There's our internal pipeline, right? What our succession is, what our current and next generation of diverse leaders look like. And then there's our external pipeline, right? And so as it relates to our external pipeline, we are very strategic about what that looks like, right? Starting, as young as high school, we have a long-standing relationship with Legal Outreach, which is a pipeline program that identifies high school students of color who are potentially interested in the law, right? Every summer we host a number of those students for an internship, right? They get to know us, we get to know them. They get to understand what it's like to be a lawyer in financial services, and really what an investment bank is, right? That's thing 1. I'd say thing 2 is we have a compliance analyst program where we work, again, with college students and give them opportunities for internships within our compliance department with the same goal of identifying talent and giving them opportunity for exposure to professionals within our department, right? Opportunities that, frankly, I did not have when I was, in high school or college. And then I think, say the third part of that pipeline is our legal internship program, where now you have students that are actually in law school, right? Who are now had just completed their first year of law school, will be interviewing for, their summer associate jobs at the end of that summer, and who are now working with us during that 6-week period between the end of their first semester and the beginning of their second semester. They get to know us, we get to know them, and more importantly, they are able to go out into the world and say, and have Morgan Stanley on their resume, right? And develop meaningful contacts with, frankly, people like me who could pick up the phone and call Nikki and say, hey, we have intern X. She was phenomenal. I would love for you to have an opportunity to meet her, right? And the last part of that pipeline is our engagement with law firms. I mentioned earlier is that, we are a large consumer of law firm business, and we have longstanding and deep relationships with law firms. And so what we want to do is enhance those relationships from a diversity perspective, from the associate level to the partner level. We want to be very deliberate about giving diverse attorneys within law firms opportunities to directly engage with us and learn from us at the beginning part of their career. And at the later part of their career, where they're either up for partner or already a partner, an opportunity to give them actual business, right? And that cuts 2 ways, right? There's senior attorneys who, many of whom do not want to be partners in law firms, right? We want to have them have opportunities to the extent they decide to move in-house, that they have connection points between us and them. And so that's part of the pipeline. I feel like it's a constant discussion and it's a constant thought about how we approach our engagement with both law firms and external parties. But based on that framework, our goal is, again, to increase the pipeline of diverse talent for this generation and the generation behind us.
Excellent. And really, it is about how do we make change in our part of the world? If we had a magic wand, or let me speak for myself, if I had a magic wand, I certainly would wave it and make diversity, equity, equality the rule, sort of the rule of law. And it is the rule of law. However, individual experiences are different. And so it's about taking the angst and the pain, the concern, the empathy, the allyship, and channeling it into action. And this is really what this is all about and what this panel is all about. So Aki, thank you for that. And so Angela, I wanna pivot us to the last bullet point here in terms of Voya's Diversity Action Plan, which you talked a little bit about earlier in your opening remarks, but can you delve a little bit more into that?
Yes, I can. And I talked probably about everything because I talk a lot. I'm so passionate about all of this stuff. So, one of the things that I think is important to note about what we've done at Voya is we actually became part of the pilot version of the Mansfield Rule in the legal department's edition. So we were part of, an initial pilot, and it was just announced earlier this year that we were one of 19 legal departments that was actually certified, Mansfield certified. And we've already raised our hands for the Mansfield Rule Legal Department 2.0 certification process too. The last time I looked, there were approximately about 50 other legal departments who raised their hands to be involved. And although we're a small company and have a small legal department, and so we don't do an excessive amount of hiring, what we did learn through the process, what I know our legal team learned was new structures and processes to put in place when opportunities do arise in-house to ensure that internal mobility and advancement of in-house counsel is enhanced through what's been learned. So, when we really think about charity starting at home, yes, it is about how we are, as individuals helping to kind of engage our communities and be involved in our employee resource groups, et cetera. But from a what can we do perspective as legal departments or entities, law firms, is we can think about taking on the challenge, right, of Mansfield certification to really live those values internally as well.
Excellent, excellent. And so we'll go to the next slide, and I want to continue to encourage our attendees. If you have questions, we're getting to the end of our time together. It's 2:17, we're together until 2:30. So if you have questions, now is the time to add them to the chat or to the Q&A, and we'll be taking them as you provide them. So in terms of the Black Legal Forum, Sarah, you talked a little bit about this. It was where are we not, right? And how can this forum, the intersection of Black lawyers, create some change? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and I guess I just want to also use the opportunity. I know it was mentioned, and I think in my maybe opening statement, I mentioned empowerment, right? And I love what we were just talking about in terms of, charity starts at home. What are we doing both in-house, and what are we doing to use our influence? We have so much power, both as individuals, we have a lot of power, but also just as in-house legal departments. So there is a huge emphasis at Chase right now around knowing more, measuring more, who we use as outside counsel, who, and why, and what we can do. We can do a lot to influence that, and we have to be doing more. So there's a big galvanization happening across the legal department involving all types of, all seniorities of attorneys in terms of what our role is, what our responsibility is, and what we can do to work together to increase diversity among the outside counsel that we use, because that creates better business results. We know this, and it's not going to happen unless we really use our power and our influence to make a change. We have that power. There's no excuse for us not to be doing more in that space. So I'm really excited to see some of the things that we're doing at JP Morgan around that. And then just the power we have as individuals. I started my practice at a couple small boutique law firms, and coming to an in-house department of Chase's size, I was just really pleasantly shocked to see how much you can do as one person in a 2,000-person law department. I mean, you can't do anything at Chase without being in relationship with somebody. You can't check a box there without being in relationship with people. So there's an intimacy, even in a very, very large legal department. There's a lot of accountability. I guess you could sort of be anonymous if you wanted to be, but it would be very difficult. I mean, it's nice to see, again, in this broader place where we are, where there is it feels to me like a real renewed focus that I hope is sustainable around our cultural, societal problems around inclusion and opportunity, that we all should feel very optimistic, even in a time where it's hard sometimes to hold on to optimism about what we can do to effectuate change, professionally, certainly in our industry. So I guess I already talked about the Black Legal Forum, so I just wanted to say something else.
Yes, no problem. And that was definitely additive. And I will just put a pin in the fact that when you share, you all have 2,000 lawyers in JP Morgan Chase. I just want to point out, we have 2,000 lawyers in our entire 41 office law firm. So, I mean, just to give it context, right? I mean, your legal department is as big as our 41 office law firm. And that is amazing.
And I mean, I couldn't believe it. We know each other. I mean, we really do. From Stacy Friedman at the top of the house on down, and we really do have to work. We couldn't do our jobs if we did not truly work harmoniously with one another and very visibly with one another. So.
Absolutely. That's just tremendous. And no small feat is that. And so I just want to talk a little bit. So we do have the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion, of which a couple of our panelists, corporations are a part of. Aki or Angela, do you want to speak to that? And then Angela to the CEO Action for Racial Equity Initiative?
So I'll speak very briefly to, in June, it was, from my perspective, remarkable to see, our CEO's reaction and response to the events that were happening. And two things that I thought, again, of the several things that were done, which I thought were particularly resonant with me. Number one, he sent out a note, explaining that, in the wake of what had happened, that he, and all of the Black managing directors globally sat down and he just listened and he reported that back. And I think that's, to me, the fact that he made a point of articulating that, not that he just met with them, but he listened to them, was a proud moment for me. So that's thing one. And I would say thing two is, just the commitment. He articulated very clearly, early and often, exactly what the firm, and him, and he was expecting of everyone else to be doing in response to what was happening. Immediately after what happened, there was, an announcement of a substantial contribution to the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, right? And there were a number of, similar announcements in the days and weeks following. But again, it was direct, it was targeted, and it was deliberate. And, embedded in that was his expectation that we hold him accountable. And so, in terms of the CEO response to what happened, it was remarkable, thoughtful, and well received by many of us.
Thank you. And so, Angela, we're going to speed this up. We have a question, and then we have 7 minutes. So if you want to talk just 30 seconds on Ethisphere, Equity and Social Justice Initiative, and then we'll take the question.
These are a couple of external initiatives that we're involved in. A person from my team as Senior Vice President is actually a full-time fellow for 2 years with that CEO Action for Racial Equity initiative, which is just going to be tremendous just in terms of the exchange and being able to add to that initiative. And I want to also, there's a question in there about individuals, but if you're going to go to that, yes. So one of the things I was going to add is these are all fantastic. They have corporations, companies doing things, making pledges, making commitments. All of this, though, boils down to everyone is an individual. Deciding that they themselves want to do better by knowing better. And that's education. That's awareness. That World Wide Web is an amazing resource. Everything that you want to know and understand about microaggressions, about the history of racism in our country. Podcasts that also speak to some of the same. You know, some of my favorite ones are Code Switch and Throughline, and there are just so many amazing resources out there. I would say, you know, one of the most important things from a workplace perspective that we can all do is when we see or hear something, we've got to say something. We've got to do something. We've got to create the environment that we want to work in, and so that everyone else can thrive. And so we can't let this be someone else's job and a responsibility up on high. It's incumbent upon all of us to be the change that we want to see the world. So I stole that from Mahatma Gandhi, that last part, but
Exactly.
it's an important,
Yes.
right? It's up to each one of us.
So I want to give Sarah a chance to answer that question. And it is, you know, please make suggestions for very intentional actions that individuals can take. Corporate initiatives are incredible, but individuals need to feel empowered in their role in being inclusive. So 30 seconds and then 30 seconds for Aki.
I think there's so many things, but maybe one way to distill it down a little bit is it's kind of listening. Angela mentioned education, like reading, learning, just exposing yourself more, getting outside of your comfort zone. If you're not a little uncomfortable, you're probably not stretching enough on this topic. And that's for anybody. I can say I've learned an incredible amount about myself, my own community. And I mean, I'm somebody that has sat on the board of community schools, is pretty involved civically. I walk around in Black skin. I mean, and I still learn. I'm constantly learning on this topic. And I think it's just like having a curiosity and about wanting to see people. And that should feel very empowering for us as individual people, because we can all do that just by listening more, trying to learn more, you know, to touch on what Angela was saying, and just being out in community. You know, you would learn about these things accidentally almost if you know, by putting yourself in community with people that maybe you wouldn't normally be in community with, you know, without kind of stretching in that way. And that translates into the workplace too.
So Aki, you want to take that one?
I think we're all saying the same thing. I would say it's really focusing on understanding, appreciating, and then overcoming your privilege. Right. And privilege takes many different forms. You know, there's a privilege that I experience as a man, right? There are certain privileges that folks have that if they are able to overcome them and have an open mind and learn from and discuss with other people, I think that more than anything is the most powerful overact someone can take to better understand these issues.
Thank you. So next slide to the end. We've got a few seconds, and we covered the inclusive, equitable policies in terms of, you know, ensuring that our leave policies are universal for both, you know, working parents across the board. The Mansfield rule we've talked about. You can go to the Diversity Lab and Google that. There is a law firm corollary of which Greenberg Traurig is a participant, and we are Mansfield Rules certified, and also a corporate law department corollary that you can learn about. And so there are many things that you can do. Next slide. So we've taken some questions, and I'd like to just take a point of personal privilege to add to what my panelists shared in terms of individual actions. The ABA on its website has a 21-day challenge that people can do individually, that you can do as a practice group or as an office. So those are things that individuals can do. My colleague said, read and educate yourself. There are resources everywhere. The National African American Museum of History has a tremendous site with all kinds of resources, how to talk to children about race and, all kinds of things. So 10 seconds each. Sarah, then Angela, and then Aki, your closing goodbyes.
Well, just thank you. Thank you to everyone out there who's listening. Thank you for all the great questions. Hopefully you're walking away learning a little bit something new on this topic that is everywhere. So I have a lot of hope. I think I said that already for the future.
And I would say thank you. It's been a pleasure, Nikki. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this panel. For everyone who is participating, think about one thing that you want to do differently. Think about one way you want to make a change and be part of bringing what is evident to us all, this need to focus on greater inclusion and belonging, not only in your workplace, but at home as well.
Thank you.
Aki?
Open ears, open minds, and open hearts.
And thank you, Aki. CJ, can I announce the code again? Is that permitted? I want to be in accordance with the regulations. CJ? I don't know if she hears me. Okay. Well, I will. CJ, can I say the code, the second code again, or is that with that?
You should not.
Yes.
No, you should not.
Okay. All right. Thank you all so much for attending. Our materials are in the content, and we hope that you enjoyed the discussion. Have a great afternoon, great morning. Thank you.
And I have one announcement to make if people want to stay on. Just the winners of the Attendify giveaway, if they'd like to listen. The actual winner was Renee Daly. However, she is graciously bowing out as she was my technical assistant and posted a lot of technical things for me. So Renee is graciously bowing out. So the third place winner is Miss Melody Cross. So she's going to win the Amazon gift card. The second place winner is Ms. Ann King. So she's going to win the Lamy pen and the notepad. And then the winner is Miss Noelle Sproul. So congratulations to all the winners. I'll be contacting you to get your home addresses to mail those out. And so don't forget, we are going to be having panel 2 replayed at 4 p.m. Eastern time. So we'll see you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was a wonderful panel. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.